Okay.
I don't think I have to sit here and explain how timeless the SNES is. It's easily one of the greatest game systems of all time. Hands down. The games on the SNES are legendary, most of them being the start of when their particular series really took off. Sure, everybody remembers Super Mario Bros. From the NES or the original Legend of Zelda, but honestly, are those games considered better than Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past? I'm not saying that those are worse games, I'm just saying that the SNES versions of those franchises are really well remembered, and for many people, their favorite games in the series. The SNES was just full of absolute classics, but there was one game on the SNES that stood above the rest. One game that, in my opinion, was one of the greatest games of all time. That's right, Donkey Kong freaking Country. They brought him back. They brought DK back from the 80s, and this time, he brought a whole goddamn country with him. He was coming in with a vengeance, and he had a tie on. That's how you know he meant fucking business. Donkey Kong Country came out at a time when the SNES was kind of sort of considered old at this point. PlayStation was already out, Sega was already on their next console, so Nintendo really needed to be able to compete. Silicone graphics computers were used to make the visuals for Donkey Kong Country. They took 3D rendered models and then put them through a system to turn them into 2D sprites, which gave it its unique look. This is what made Donkey Kong as big as it was. Truthfully so, while the gameplay was amazing, and of course the soundtrack is incredible, it was the graphics that really pushed Donkey Kong Country over the top and made it so popular. But if there's one other thing that Donkey Kong Country is famous for, it's also its music. The soundtrack for Donkey Kong Country is incredible. It was composed by David Weiss, who did some pretty unprecedented things with the SNES's sound chip at the time to make some incredible soundtracks that not only were absolute bops, but also had amazing ambient sounds mixed into the audio to make the illusion of just a complete world. You felt like you were in the jungle. You felt like you were in a cave. It's just astounding. And it was pretty mind-blowing for people to hear something like that coming out of an SNES. But of course, you can't mention Donkey Kong Country without mentioning the characters. Donkey Kong came back alright, and he didn't come back alone. There were the new antagonists of the series, the Kremlings, a bunch of crocodile people led by King K. Rool, the greatest villain in video games, but back to him later. There was Diddy Kong, who was Donkey Kong's best buddy and also served as the second life for the player. There was also Cranky Kong, who was the original Donkey Kong from the original Donkey Kong arcade, who now is just this old curmudgeon who bitched and complained about how shitty modern games were, which was hilarious. He also served as sort of a hint character who would give you little hints on where to go and what to do next. Then you had Funky Kong, a Kong where they said, hey, what would the 90s look like? And then there you go. He probably survived on a diet of Crystal Pepsi, 3D Doritos, and Dunkaroos. But he was cool, and he ran a plane service that pretty much allowed you to backtrack and go to old stages and areas that you had been to before. Then you had Candy Kong. Candy Kong is questionable in her design. I say questionable because she's a little bit too anthropomorphic. She was Donkey Kong's girlfriend and served as your save points, where you would jump into her barrel in order to save your games. This also kind of added up to the difficulty because you couldn't save at any time. You could only save when you got to a candy space on the map. The challenge of the game, the great characters, the great music. Donkey Kong Country would go on to become the second highest selling game on the SNES, only behind Super Mario World. Which, let's face it, Super Mario World got boosted because of Bob Hoskins, okay? That's why that was number one. But either way, Rare would deliver, and they were far from done. There was so much more that they could do with Donkey Kong, and little did we all know that it was only the first in what would become a phenomenal game series to come. And it was about to get so much better. That's right, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest. Rare said, hey, what if we make Donkey Kong with pirates this time? No, not those pirates. Yeah, pretty much those pirates. That's right, King K. Rool came back, and this time he brought the Kremlings dressed up as fucking pirates to hound the Kongs. And guess what else? Rare, in one of the ballsiest moments in video games, decided to remove the main character from the game. That's right, Donkey Kong, whose name is in the goddamn title, isn't even in the game. He's pretty much the Princess Peach of Donkey Kong Country 2. He's the Zelda of Donkey Kong Country 2. He wasn't even there. King K. Rool came and snatched his ass the fuck up, which then leaves it to Diddy Kong and his girlfriend Dixie Kong to jump in and save DK from the vengeance-hungry King K. Rool. Of course, the aforementioned Dixie was a new character, but we had other new characters as well, such as Wrinkly Kong, Cranky's wife, and the absolutely stunning Swanky Kong. Look at this fucking guy. Just look at him and tell me that this isn't one of the greatest characters ever put into video games. The game also took us out of the tropics of Donkey Kong Island and thrust us into the creepy, dark swamps of Crocodile Isle, the home island of the Kremlings, which was a really cool atmosphere. It was dark, it was kind of creepy, and it was just overall amazing. Of course, this atmosphere was also helped by David Weiss returning to do the soundtrack, and boy did he pump out one hell of a good soundtrack. The Donkey Kong Country 2 soundtrack is far superior to the first game. I mean, way better. But with all that said, Rare still wasn't done. They still were not finished yet, and the N64 was pretty much out. But the SNES was still selling. Why? Because of Donkey Kong. They did it again with Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie's Double Trouble, and again removed Donkey Kong right out of the game. Not only did they remove Donkey Kong, but this time they took Diddy out too. Now the adventure was just down to Dixie and her cousin Kitty Kong, who, well, let's just say that he wasn't one of the more popular Kongs introduced into the Donkey Kong game. Not a lot of people like Kitty Kong. I don't really know why people hate Kitty Kong. I guess it's because he was just a goofy-ass baby in a onesie. I don't know. I don't particularly hate Kitty. He's okay, but I can see why I guess people are annoyed with him. Either way, Donkey Kong Country 3 takes the adventure into the Northern Cremisphere, a completely new land where DK and Diddy went on vacation to try to get over all the King K. Rool business that happened before, and of course the both of them get kidnapped, which now leaves Dixie and Kitty to have to go and save them. So this game introduced a few new characters, mostly the Brothers Bear and all that kind of stuff, in a completely new location. The music was not done by David Weiss this time, interestingly enough, though he did advise on the soundtrack. Donkey Kong Country 3 overall is kind of the one game in the series that a lot of people don't like so much, but it was still extremely well received and sold incredibly well. All while the next generation consoles were in full swing, including the Nintendo 64. It kept the SNES relevant in a time where it should have probably been dead. Which brings me to the next point. Donkey Kong had to make it to the N64 at some point, right? Oh boy, did he ever. Yes, Diddy Kong Racing did exist before Donkey Kong 64, but Diddy Kong Racing was a side game, so I don't really count it in the direct series. Donkey Kong 64, however, is in the direct series, though interestingly enough, not considered a country game because it doesn't have the title of Donkey Kong Country 64, it's simply Donkey Kong 64. Either way, Rare was coming hot off of games such as Diddy Kong Racing, Perfect Dark, Banjo-Kazooie, so finally they got around to making Donkey Kong on the N64. This game is probably one of the most divisive of the Donkey Kong series. You will meet people that absolutely despise this game and people that absolutely love this game. So why do people despise Donkey Kong 64? Most people hate it because, well, it was long, and also because there's a million collectibles. See, Donkey Kong 64 was a collectathon, much like Banjo-Kazooie that came before it. Or like Mario 64, where you basically go around and collect whatever the item is that you need, stars, blah blah blah. Donkey Kong, much in every other Donkey Kong game, collects bananas, so he collects bananas in Donkey Kong 64. However, every other Kong also collects bananas, and every other Kong has their own colored bananas. And just to let you know, there are quite a few more Kongs in this game that are playable than other games. You had Donkey Kong returning to the series after being absent for 2 games before this. Diddy Kong was back, of course. But then we had new Kongs introduced. Lanky Kong, the orangutan, Chunky Kong, the big gorilla who's just big and strong, and of course Tiny Kong, who was Dixie Kong's little sister. So these 3 Kongs were added into the mix, which gave you a grand total of 5 Kongs to play as. Each and every single one of those Kongs had their own colored bananas. They also had golden bananas that they could get, as well as ammunition. Yeah, there was ammunition in this game. Why? Because Donkey Kong was packing fucking heat. Rare looked at the Donkey Kong series and said, well, what do you think it needs? Guns. That's what it needs. Let's put fucking guns in there. So they gave Donkey Kong and the whole DK crew guns, which was an okay touch, I suppose. Donkey Kong 64 overall is definitely one of the weirder games in the series. However, I have to give it complete props for adding to the narrative of the Donkey Kong series. You see, unlike other platformers in the 90s, Donkey Kong had an actual narrative and a moving story, which is something that I love about it. Characters actually change, characters come and go, and that's just incredible. Donkey Kong 64 added to this. Characters like Wrinkly Kong, for example, is dead in Donkey Kong 64, and she's a fucking ghost, which is hilarious. Funky Kong becomes a full-on arms dealer, which is just absolutely ridiculous, and Candy Kong looks more like a stripper than she ever did. Of course, then there's King K. Rool and his Kremlings. King K. Rool shows up in this game in his massive battleship. It's basically the Death Star of the Donkey Kong Country series, and he's out for revenge. You see, King K. Rool is a villain who just over time just slowly went more and more insane because he kept getting beat by the Kongs, to the point of where he finally shows up to Donkey Kong Island, and his ultimate plan is to just blow it right the fuck up. That's right, King K. Rool was literally going to blow up Donkey Kong Island, which finally brings us to the crocodile himself. Let me take some time to explain my love for King K. Rool. First of all, look at him. What an absolute unit.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
Second of all, you want to talk about a multi-dimensional villain? Look at this man. You want a king? He's a king. You want a pirate? He's a fucking pirate. Oh, I'm sorry, you wanted a mad scientist? Look, he's a fucking mad scientist. Oh look, you wanted Mike Tyson? Look, he's Mike Tyson now. King K. Rool is always doing something new and unique. He's always changing his persona, which makes him super interesting. King K. Rool just oozes cartoon villain, and I absolutely love it. Every time you fight him, the boss fight is different. Every time you see him, he's got some new ridiculous costume on, and he's just acting out some new persona. It's absolutely incredible. This is one of the reasons why he's one of my favorite villains in all of video games, and I just absolutely love him. By now, dear viewer, I'm sure you're probably thinking to yourself, "Wowee, Joe, what a wonderful summary of such a beautiful game series." But you're probably wondering, how come Donkey Kong Country isn't talked about in the same light nowadays that it used to be? Well...
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
I just want to thank everybody for watching. I've gotten a lot of love and support over the past week since the post of my first video, so this is only my second video that I've put up, and I'm pretty proud of it, but obviously I have a long ways to go. I'm still a little rough around the edges. But, you know, Donkey Kong is one of my favorite game series of all time, and I just really wanted to talk about it. This is part 1 of a 2-part series, so get ready for part 2 soon. But yeah, thank you for liking and subscribing. I want to thank everybody who's actually, watching my videos. I really appreciate the support, and I hope to see more support, and I hope to see more of you watching in the future. So, like, subscribe, comment, and thanks again. Bye.